In this lesson, we will focus our attention on understanding appropriate IT policy compliance and compliance technologies. It's important to keep in mind that in a complex IT environment, that it can be very difficult in order to maintain compliance as well as maintaining appropriate technologies that are in place to ensure compliance. And so this is difficult because there are always going to be constantly changing dynamics within the organization or company. These dynamics could be changes that occur with regards to different employees, different regulations that come into effect, as well as different agencies that oversee those rules and regulations. So this means that we have to have a strong intent on understanding how to comply with those regulations and ensuring that data is protected to ensure that policy compliance standards are in place. There are various laws that are in place to ensure that consumers are protected in the event that a data breach is likely to occur. And so in order for us to best understand how we can comply with specific laws, we'll focus on a number of different aspects that need to be considered. And so when working and understanding IT policy compliance and compliance technologies, some of the key objectives and concepts that we'll focus on is ensuring that we're able to describe the different issues related to defining, tracking, monitoring, and reporting, automating, and organizing compliance systems and technologies. Some key concepts that we will focus our attention on are a baseline understanding of definitions related to information systems security, tracking, monitoring, and reporting for IT security baseline definition and policy compliance. We'll also focus on understanding the automation of IT security policy compliance, policy configuration management, and change control management as well. And we'll also focus on compliance technologies and appropriate solutions. Key components will also focus on ensuring that we understand how to automate policy distribution, that we're able to describe configuration management and change control management appropriately, and that we're able to define and contrast appropriate security content automation protocols as well. So one thing that we have to keep into consideration is we want to create a baseline definition for information system security. And so what we want to keep in mind and consider is that we consider a baseline to be the starting point or standard. And essentially what this means is that the baseline is going to provide a set of basic configurations that can be used to achieve specific security objectives. So variations in these security objectives can occur, and they're going to be represented by the appropriate security policies and security frameworks. So some minimum security settings that will be involved include ensuring that appropriate protocols, services, and accounts are in place, that we're able to identify and measure appropriate compliance, and that we can compare current settings to baseline settings as well. And so when we think about components associated with the security policy, we have to provide appropriate information, and that information is going to, of course, include ensuring that we have protocols, and the protocols are going to be specific protocols that are allowed within the security policy. Any protocols that are not listed within the security policy should be removed appropriately from use within the organization. We'll also focus our attention on services. Specifically, we want to ensure that only the services that are listed in the security policy are those that are utilized and allowed. Any services that are not listed, they should be removed appropriately as well or disabled. In regards to accounts, we want to ensure that the administrator account is renamed and that the new administrator is listed in the security policy. So these are a few items that a security policy should have. So at a baseline, we want to ensure that the server baseline is configured to enforce appropriate and correct use of appropriate standards for monitoring, as well as enforce the utilization of passwords correctly. And so we want to keep in mind that there can be many uses of baselines within the information technology domain. And so what we want to do is make sure that we have a overall policy defining IT infrastructure security definition. And so in order for this to occur, we want to ensure that we're using appropriate imaging technology. And so many organizations and companies will make use of baselines, and they'll use imaging and imaging techniques in order to provide a standardized way to set those baselines. And so imaging techniques are useful because they can be used in a way that they provide the full system settings, the operating system, as well as the applications and user profiles. So this allows for a turnkey operation for the system. And so in this example that we have here, we demonstrate how imaging technologies can be used. So in this example that we have here, we're showing how we can start with a system in the beginning that is represented as the source computer. Upon startup, this source computer is a clean slate that can be easily used. In order to make use of it, we will install the operating system as well as the applications that are going to be used on the source computer. And then what we'll need to do is we'll have to provide settings. And the settings are going to vary based off of the user and the user profiles. Once those settings are applied to the user profiles, we're going to configure appropriately the settings for the security settings as well as for policy recommendations. And so once these are all set, we can remove unnecessary information. So remember when we referred back to working with protocol services and accounts, that we want to remove protocols that are not going to be used. We want to disable services that are not going to be used. And we want to ensure that the current account, the current administrator account is the administrator that has access to the system. And so this provides us with a baseline that we can use to provide security for a system. And security is further enhanced by minimizing the total cost of ownership that would manage these various components. And so once these components are configured appropriately, they can be made use of within the organization in a safe and secure manner. And so the overall approach for a policy defining IT infrastructure security is that we'll apply our baselines. This will improve security, which means that we're going to have less chance of missing a setting on an individual system. And it will also reduce the total cost of ownership. In turn, this will save time for individual configuration, as well as reduce appropriate troubleshooting time as well. And so the overall process involves installing the operating system and the application, We will configure appropriate user settings as needed, configure appropriate security settings. We'll capture images and we'll deploy those settings throughout the organization. And so typically, if we have a master image that is going to be copied and deployed, we refer to this image as the gold master image. And so gold master images can be used in order to eliminate tasks that might seem to be redundant and repetitive. And the tasks can vary. It could be elimination of changes to configuration settings, as well as improving performance, as well as we can make use of the gold master to replicate systems throughout the organization. And so if all of the systems are set up and configured appropriately using our appropriate standards, then this makes it a lot easier for service and help desk to perform troubleshooting techniques as well. So one key thing to keep in mind is that we want to be sure to protect the integrity of the system and the integrity of our gold master image. Because if the gold master is infected with malware, then what this means is that we're going to have different replications of that gold master, all containing the malware as well. So these are some appropriate considerations to keep in mind when defining the overall IT infrastructure security baseline.